Welcome to the Multifamily 0 to 1 online meetup, where we discuss the best strategies to get started in apartment syndication.
Thanks everybody for joining us. For those who are new, this is really informal. We have a list of questions for Charles, who will introduce himself in a minute. But the idea is the more questions you can ask, then we are making sure that we're answering your questions instead of our own questions.
Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that this is an educational presentation and we're not making any investment recommendation. You should always consult with your CPA and attorney for financial and legal advice.
My name is Marcelo Cazini. My background is in IT and management. I have an MBA from Texas A&M. I'm also a local Houston CCIM member, and I've completed all the CCIM designation trainings. And in real estate, I'm a multifamily investor, and I own and operate my own commercial real estate. And I've also passively invested, being a KP on deals, and before multifamily, I was doing some single family fix and flips. Martin?
Yeah, it's not updated yet for me. I don't know if you guys see it, but yeah, basically, I'll let Claudia start.
Yeah, I was born in Colombia, South America. I have a degree in architecture, and my background is asset managing my own assets in Colombia. And now that we have our first syndication here in Houston, then we're doing that. I'm full-time real estate, and I hold an NAA, National Apartment Association certification. That's called IROP, which means Independent Rental Owner Professional.
And I'm an IT security consultant for over 24 years, almost 25 years. I've been doing a lot of consulting all my life, but I've also had several businesses. So I have a background on business management and consulting, both of them. Today we are in multifamily partners, general or limited partners in a little bit under 800 units in different markets in Texas and Arkansas, mostly Dallas, Houston, and Little Rock, Arkansas, and Beaumont, Texas.
All right. And with that, our guest of honor today, Charles, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Charles LeMaire. By the way, welcome to Bedford, Texas. You know, we're live from Bedford, as it were, here at LeMaire Manor. Let's see, I have a double E and a BSEE and an MSEE, not that that matters a whole lot. I also got an MBA, so I got too many degrees. I sort of like education, I suppose. I never touched anything in the way of real estate until my wife dragged me, other than the house we own, dragged me down to Lifestyles, and we went once, walked out, came back, and joined. Brad Sumrock was the guy teaching on that weekend class, and this sort of gives away one of the answers that he asked, but did I ever do a single family home? No, I could not see any benefit in that single family stuff. But when he started talking about the multifamily, it sounded like magic. I liked the math behind it and jumped in with both feet. So that was in 2010. Started doing the first deal in 2011. Also one of the questions he gave me, so darn, I've given them all away. Been doing it for ballpark, 9 years, 10 years, whatever you count them. And I rather enjoy it. It has just become a rather lucrative hobby for me. Let's see, should I say anything else about myself? I am unemployed, as they say. You know, I retired in 2018, June. And when I started this, they talked about, you could double your money in 3 to 5 years and retire in 5 years. Took me 8 years, so I'm an underachiever. So just to make that clear. But that's pretty much, let's see, did I do anything else? A bunch of doors, not that that matters. I own pretty much the sawdust for the little keyhole thing on almost every door. And that's about it. Oh, happily married, got 2 daughters. Both of them are happily married, and both of them are off the payroll.
So, Charles, I know you already told us a little bit about your previous life professionally, and that you didn't do any single family. Did you have any real estate experience, like directly or indirectly? Like maybe your family had real estate, or how did you get attracted to real estate if you were not in that industry?
Well, back to my wife dragged me into it. Gayla, beautiful, lovely person. She wanted to do some real estate, and she did go take classes, and she did get hired as a real estate agent. But she determined in short order that she did not like doing cold calls, and she did not like working on the weekend. And you can see that that was a wonderful, positive kind of thing. So she immediately decided to drag us, after she sold 2 or 3 houses, and then dragged me down there so that I could do the work on multifamily stuff. And, God bless her, it has worked out wonderfully well. She's responsible for all this. But by and large, that is the only thing that we had to do with this. She does get involved to an extent, but she lets me do it. She's so sweet to me to let me do most of the work. But that was really the only thing that was put into it. Let's see, neither parent was into real estate. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else. I've got nobody. I can't think of anybody other than, we knew an agent that we bought this house with, but we didn't like her anyway, so what the heck. So no, nothing.
Okay, so when you actually first found out about multifamily, what made it so interesting compared to what your wife was doing on single family? Why did you get hooked?
Oh, the math. Single family, let's say that I went and bought a couple of single families and rented them out. I would then have to be dealing with people. I didn't want to deal with people. I don't even like people. That's not exactly true, but by and large, I don't want to get calls in the middle of the night. I don't want to fix toilets. I fix my own occasionally. I sort of enjoy doing a little wiring occasionally, but I don't want to do it on somebody else's schedule. I'm not a great person when it comes to some projects. I mean, there's a few that have been sitting around for years that I haven't finished, and somehow I don't think that's particularly the way to handle a rent house. So I didn't want to get involved in that too much. You could, of course, get a manager, and they could do it, but then you got to pay them, and I'm way too cheap. But when and Lifestyle does both single family and multifamily, so when they talked about the single family, it just wasn't exciting. But when they got to the multifamily, it was, oh wow, all of it's in there. It's the the ragu, everything's in the sauce, and then you've got the ability to do the forced appreciation. I don't think we called it forced appreciation back in those days, but it seems to be the right title now. And the math was just genius. It just worked. And I was like, I can understand this. So being as it was a good math solution, a good investment, I have invested in, Wall Street, and I'm still in Wall Street, but I could understand where this was a great diversification for me. I should go back to, the beginning. I was born at a young age. I grew up in Nashville. My dad, who had nothing to do with finance except losing money, wonderful man. He was a great father, but he liked to get rich quick schemes that never worked. I don't think he liked them because they didn't work, but he liked them to try them. In any case, I watched him do so many things wrong that it taught me not to do stuff like that. So I was adverse to, making deals and things. But he was a tennis pro at a country club, and so I grew up with what I call my silver-plated spoon. I did not realize we were poor, and we weren't terribly poor. I mean, I never went without food. Matter of fact, he was a great cook. My parents got divorced, and when I was home, I lived with him. But essentially, I had several friends, one of which was a little bit math challenged, and he would take me to investment seminars so we could go home and I could explain them to him. It was a great introduction. I mean, we didn't have any money, and I couldn't invest, but I got introduced to all this stuff, and so I got a very good feeling of how money worked, and that was very useful for me. So I wasn't uncomfortable with writing a big check, and by the way, they were checks when I started out. I was uncomfortable handing this check to some dude that I had met, and I thought he was okay, but who the heck knew if he was going to run off to Mexico or not. And so I was pushing that check toward him with one hand and pulling it back with the other when it first started, which I always thought was a humorous way. Now you just hit the button and the money goes, but maybe you have to have trouble getting to the button. But anyway, it was fascinating to me. I always found money interesting. When I did my time in the service, I found some classes that were there, and I did a retirement planning class. I did an investing class, but I am an engineer, so I do mostly engineering stuff. But then I went and got an MBA just essentially for fun. I never really used it, but it was interesting to me on how you make those kinds of decisions, and it has come in useful for me. So it was open, and my family grew up with money. Now I got to say that we were not broke. My grandfather was in fact a doctor. We were never broke. My father was not so good at money, but my mother inherited some over time, and blah blah blah. So no poor me on this thing. I did just wonderfully well. Let's see. Did that answer that question? I think.
Yeah, that's an awesome background
Okay.
on how you got to real estate. Yeah, go ahead, Marcelo.
So I think you mentioned already a couple of different organizations. There's Lifestyles and Sunrock, but is that how you felt like you needed to get started to learn the business?
Yes. This was 2010. There were very few books out there. I am a person, I would go to a class on more or less anything in college. I would read the book, but I very much enjoyed having the professor to interrogate. And on that first class, most of you know Brad. I went through and asked so many questions. He was like going, "Please don't join. Please don't join." And we joined. And so then he had his first deal. I think many people have heard the story about, Pioneer Creek, which was originally Oroya, which I know the word, but he always says nobody's ever heard of the word. And I went, it means a dry gulch. But in any case, he bought that thing, and I was sending emails like, yeah, I'd like to get into this. Yeah, I'd like to get into this. And he kept losing those emails, interestingly enough. And maybe it was that we don't look all that rich, or maybe it was because he didn't want to put up with all my questions. Hard to say, but essentially he was not the first deal I got into on that thing. I got into another fellow's deal, something called Rock Island. But let's see. Yeah.
All right. And did you focus on a particular market, or were you mostly looking at the deal first? What were you, when you were trying to pick your first deals there?
To me, it's sponsor first. I go to these meetups. I'm very lucky in that I'm in the Brad group, and I was in Lifestyles. But effectively, and this didn't work for the first one because you have to learn, but today I look for a sponsor, a guy who understands a little bit of business. He might have run something. He's managed a few people. He's done something like that, because that's a capability that I like. I like a guy who pays attention. He's detail-oriented. You feel that he's going to be there. You can never know in advance, but you feel like he's going to be involved and work the deal pretty well. So effectively, it's find the guy first. And, you find 10, you find 20 guys, and then ultimately one of those people turns out to get a deal. So then you listen to the deal. In the early days, we would go over to a guy's house and he would do a presentation. Today, it's mostly online, as you can see. I don't think I've seen an in-person meeting in a very long time now. And so you listen to the deal. And at this point, I'm taking notes and I'm going like, I don't like that, or I don't like that. Most of the stuff that I like isn't all that important. So when I hit something I don't like, it takes it off the list. And if there's a few things I don't like, I'm not in it. But if there's very few things I don't like, I might learn to live with that one, and I go forward and I'll invest in the thing. And I got to admit, like Craig, I get a little bit of a bug on these things, and I don't hear about deals I don't like often. So I had to go get a real estate patch, put it on so I could quit buying so dang much real estate and get out of it. But, we went through, when you get up to 50, you got a bunch of them. Right now we've sold 16, so I'm holding 34. My present game plan is not that I don't like real estate. It's I've got to cut back on the number total. And so I'm trying to let them bleed off. Thank you, beer virus. They're not going to sell right now, but ultimately some of them will sell. The other piece of it for me is that when I was a kid, I watched old people, again, my silver-plated spoon, but they would get bonds and they'd run down to the bank and they'd stick them in their safety deposit box, and they'd take their scissors and clip those bearer bonds and get their money and live on that for the rest of their time. Well, bonds don't pay worth darn right now, so I have apartment complexes. And there's no coupons on apartment complexes, but essentially I have this plan that 1 or 2 will sell every year, and we got a pretty good income for the next 10 or 20 years, and we just keep rolling them over. So that's pretty much my plan on these things. So let's see, it's sponsor first, then you look at the deal, and if it ain't terrible, and it's got, you know, good exit plan, they're not doing stupid stuff, it makes sense, I'll jump in, or, you know, if there's nothing I don't like about it, I'll jump in and get into the thing, and then I'll wait. And, you know, hopefully it'll pay out. Not every one of the deals I've done, because I'm no wizard, they don't always work out, but my track record's doing okay. And, you know, we've done very, very well. And we lucked out by starting at about the right time. You know, people go, oh, 2011, it must have been wonderful. Actually, the best ones were in 2014, and that's when we really made a killing, when we went from about 14 to 18, something like that. Clayton, I like your girlfriend there. That's really cute. Okay, never mind.
And Charles,
right.
Craig was asking, why have you never sponsored?
I had a job that I worked at Texas Instruments. I really enjoyed what I did. I can't say I loved the commute. Matter of fact, I hated the commute, but I liked pretty much the people I worked with, not necessarily for. I liked what I did, and perhaps stupidly, because I could be really wealthy, but that's not really what drives me. But I was fairly good at what I did. Now, don't get me wrong. Nobody ever offered to get me a Nobel Prize. That was never on the table. I'm not that smart, but I enjoyed working, and I was comfortable, and it paid the bills, it paid the medical, you know, and I was just brought up in that age because, you know, my father was a working slug, I was a working slug, so I had no intent of actually quitting. If they had laid me off, I would have jumped into being a sponsor. It was a great backup plan, but they didn't, and so I didn't jump in that direction. I will say that my attitude after about the 4th year we started selling properties, you know, got in 11, so around 15 we sold properties, and for the next 3 years until I retired, they couldn't tell me what to do too well because I just tell them to take a hike. It was no big deal to leave at that point. So anyway, but no, I just never was motivated to do it. At this point, I don't need the hassle. I get plenty of money on this thing. Don't tell my wife; she won't think it's enough, but by and large, I do, and we do just fine.
All right.
So, Charles, would you mind telling us a little bit more about your first deal, like how many units, location?
Okay. Yeah. I got the 0 to 1 in the message on this thing, and I finally figured out you're talking about how do I get to the first deal. And it's not really the most interesting one, but it certainly has a good history. So sure, let's talk about that. I put some notes down, so let me make sure I get some of the things that I wanted to say about that. Okay, so it was by and large 160 units. In those days, we paid about $6 million, just under, as I recall. We raised about 2.9. And I got to tell you, I had to go back and look at a bunch of notes to find these things out because I had no real recollection. These are not things that I memorized. We're going to use this guy's initials. His initials were Mike. Oh, well, we'll leave it at Mike. And Mike did, this was a lifestyle. So pre-Brad, he was a Brad student because Brad was the lifestyles educator. And when he left, we followed him. But by and large, Brad was still there at this time. So Mike got into this deal. It's Rock Island over in Irving, Texas, 160 units. Like I said, there's a street that's Rock Island. It's just south of the railroad tracks. Mike did real well for about the first 18 months. And I say that because Brad bought a place about a mile away around the corner called Kirkwood. And I would sort of pit them against one another. One quarter, one would do a little bit better. The other quarter, the other would do a little bit better. So he was running along with Brad. So, you know, he was doing a good job. At about the 18-month mark, or really more accurately about the 13, 14-month mark, things probably got a little shaky. And one of the questions they might ask, well, what would I have done differently? And I'll just say it right up front, acted sooner. But I didn't recognize all the bad things at this point. But he started doing some flaky stuff, and the list is long and confusing, and it's very involved, but he messed up a few things. At that time, and Lifestyles had a rule that you had to get your permission from your investors to start the next deal, and he had done that, and he was doing fine. So he started a deal over in Fort Worth called Brazos. It was originally Valhalla. He turned it into Brazos, so we went from heaven to a river, whatever. In any case, that one was a heavy value play. Rock Island was, in fact, supposed to be a complete yield play, but it turned out to be mostly yield, but with a value component. Hopefully that makes sense for our new person who I don't know who it is. You know, yield says you buy a place and it's cooking just fine. You're just going to take over, do better, and make money. A value play, on the other hand, is in the dumper. You've got a lot of maintenance to do. You're going to have to turn the place around, so you buy it at a discount, put a lot of money into it. The yield play typically will start paying pretty quick. The value play probably won't pay anything for a year, 18 months. So Mike buys into this Brazos thing, and it was a bit much for him. And I don't honestly know what was the trigger or the straw that broke the camel's back, but we will just say that he lost focus, and he lost focus bad. And it became obvious on December 23rd of 12. Let's see, we bought it June of 11. So 18 months later, I get a letter from the bank that says we're in default. This is not a good thing. Now, it was informational default, not money default. I did end up on the bad boy list for a year, I will say that. So I called the bank the next day because I was a KP on the deal and talked to some guy whose name I couldn't pronounce and told him we would fix this thing. And of course, he didn't believe me worth a darn. But I'd also called Mike. And, you know, one of the humor things on this story is a couple of weeks later, he mentioned to me that he didn't bother to call the bank because he knew no one would be there on the day before Christmas. I sort of laughed to myself and didn't tell him that I'd talked to the guy that day, but that's, you know, neither here nor there. By the end of January, Mike was out. Kenny Wolf, and I think many of you may know Kenny. Kenny was an investor on Rock Island. I was KP. So the two of us together, we got everybody together. We formed a cabal, and we ultimately pushed Mike out. Poof, he's gone. On his way out, and he does not send me Christmas cards anymore, as you might well gather. First, he accused us of being, you know, crooked, illegal. You know, he was going to sue us. The next day, he finally, you know, admitted that, yes, what we did had been legal, but he was really, really mad at us and that we were terrible people. Probably some language in there at some point. But I told him at that point, I said, you clean up the other one, you'll keep your reputation. Well, by the end of February, or a week later, they called me up, the KPs on that deal. I was also invested in Brazos, and I was, you know, talking to the KPs regularly because it was clear he was messing both deals up. So by the end of February, we had him out of that place too. I became their consultant on how to throw a guy out of a property. So one lead, two properties, poof, he's gone. I was sort of concerned nobody would ever let me into a property again, but that didn't seem to be the problem. You know, you show them green money, they'll let you back in. So it was a fairly interesting deal in that respect. Let's see. One of the other comments I would make is he was his own property manager. And a lot of our problem was that he was authorizing the checks to be paid to himself in so many ways that it really didn't turn out to be a good deal. So I tend not to want to deal with people who are their own property manager at this point. That one's always got a little bit of a bad taste. And as long as I'm on that topic, people who are their own construction person, that also gives me a little bit of bad flavor. Anytime the boots on the ground are also the construction guy, where the guy who's putting in the bills is signing the payments and walking off with the money, not a good idea. Just to make that out there. Let's see, do I have anything else I want to say about that one? No, that was pretty good. Anybody got a question about a good deal that went well?
Well, that was
not it.
Interesting comment. I'm surprised that didn't scare you away and kept you going on multifamily. That's awesome.
Well, by this time I was already in 3 or 4 deals by the 18-month point because I was just getting into them. And I got to say, Brad's a great teacher, and so you know he had coached me very well. You know, I'm pretty deep. I get into a lot of details, and so it was just work the problem. You know, I've got a list of horror stories, but none of them have run me off because you just work the problem. It's just fix it and go on. One of the humorous things is we started renting out Brazos, the second property, after we finally got it fixed up. Mike was, let's see, how would we do this? He'd put down the carpet and then paint the walls and then replace the carpet, paint the ceiling and replace the carpet. And, it just kept going like that. So we were wasting a lot of money. But we started leasing the place out, and then come to find out he had not gotten certificates of occupancy on any of the buildings he was working on. And so the city came down and was about to shut us down. We begged them to, give us a little bit of a break, and we got that fixed. But it was rather interesting. Becker, who I think many people know, was the banker who was funding the money from Wells Fargo on the second deal. I keep going back to the second deal. I'm sorry, it's, they were all sort of merged together in this thing. But that's how I got to know Becker. Good guy, and the stories about him were all true. It was a lot of fun. But there's just a lot of interesting things. But that's not the worst story. I mean, I had one guy, and I don't mean worst in this case, but on another property, it was called Bennett Lofts. My lead, his wife got sick. There were 7 total investors, I believe it was. I was the KP. A guy named Jim DeCoo was the lead on the deal, and we had, 5 other people in there. And so, Jim's wife gets sick, and in those days it was, one guy, one deal, gunslinger style, because, it didn't take nearly as much money. The prices were lower, blah, blah. It was also a bit of a buyer's market, not a seller's market. So his wife gets sick, and the other guys turn to me and say, Charles, Tag, you're it. You're taking over. You've got the most experience. So I ran the thing for about 6 months, and, it went better. Now, I will say that we had a new property manager. We'd had a couple ladies online, so I'll try to clean that up. We had a very bad manager that we did not like and didn't do us a bit of good. There was some concern that they were stealing from us, but after doing a lot of math on the thing, I didn't think there was enough money for them to steal. So I don't think it was really that they were stealing. They were just really bad at what they did. Anyway, I took it from about 70% occupancy to 100% occupancy in 2 months. We had some down units, and we had no money to fix them with, so I wrote them a check and said, fix the units. Boom, we fixed them, we rented them, and that actually helped tremendously because now we can start paying our bills. And so after doing the math at that point, I said, okay, guys, we're doing a cash call. So we all ponied up 8% more, paid off our debt because we were deep in debt at that point, ran it for about another year and a half, and some dude wanted the property. This was over in a part of town where we could pretty much see that we were a B plus inside of a D area, but down the street, let's see, where's my picture? Yeah, down the street, there were A's going in, and so as the A's approached us, our value shot up like a rocket, and we sold the place for a heck of a profit. Made 45% internal rate of return or annualized return, if that's the way you want to put it. So happy days were here again at that point. So no, I got no problems with fixing problems. It's a good thing to go fix them.
No,
let's see, was there
awesome.
anything else about that Rock Island? Yeah, that was pretty much the main parts on the Rock Island and the Brazos. Then we got that. Oh, and then Jim DeCoo, and it's sad. Jim was a nice guy. He and I, before buying that Bennett Lofts property, he and I also bought a property that we called Franconia. In those days, again, that was one of the lifestyles deals. And in those days, lifestyles would not have bus trips. They would have carpools. The carpools were on Friday, not Saturday. So old Charles is at work, and he would send Gayla out to do all the hard stuff by looking at the places. Gayla called me up and says, Charles, we're buying this place at 95 door. And this was 2011 or 12. It was early on. And as I picked up my jaw off the floor, I said, I beg your pardon? Well, I ran the number. I said, yeah, okay, we can afford it. And looked at all the stuff. And Jim and I, we essentially put it in. We bought that place, ran it for about 6 or 7 years total. At about the year 6 mark, sadly, Jim passed away. So yet another story is I took over after he was gone because we were the only 2 investors. So, it's not that I can't run a property if I have to. It's just that I'm not motivated to do it. I'm lazy. Color me lazy.
So we have a question from Jorge and Laura. Do you guys want to ask that?
Perfect. Yeah, Charles, thank you so much for all the detail. The question that I have is, one of the reasons why we want to join multifamily is because we want to diversify from the stock market. So my question to you, once you stabilized with multifamily, what is your ratio of multifamily versus equities?
let's see, off the top of my head, I have, I don't know, excuse me for not doing percentages. It's just easier this way. I've got about $2 million in Roth and IRA and 401k that's been rolled into IRAs at this point. And I leave it in the stock market because somehow doing IRAs in property just don't work very well. And I've got about $2.5 million stuck in properties at this point if you take it at the purchase value, more or less. So, you know, it goes up occasionally. Now, that was in February. Today, it might be a lot less, but we'll see. You know, I'm hoping it'll come back. But by and large, so I'm slightly higher in the property these days than I am the stock market. We are older, and, you know, this will sound stupid, but whenever you start getting older and you go to financial advisors, they kill off the guy first. It's just the way they do it. Looking for gray hair here. Craig, you're my best candidate here. They probably do that to you too. You go to these guys, they kill off the guy. So we're sort of in the mode of looking for how to make it easy for my wife and her new boyfriend when I'm gone. And so the idea is that we're looking into, you know, financial managers and things like that. I like doing my own stuff, but right now I'm letting him, as we test it, work. And I got a guy in Fort Worth. He's doing a great job. Well, actually, he's doing a good job. He yanked it all out for the big downturn, and now he's back in the thing. And I'm like, yeah, this is going okay. The other half of it is over at Schwab, and they don't yank it out. You know, they're not that way. So I'm sure I took it in the teeth over there, but it'll come back. It's not a big deal. I also carry a lot of one of the questions was, how do I handle a downturn? I don't eat on the property. One of my rules is you cannot eat the distributions. Do not depend on them. They are not eating money. They are vacation money. When you are getting into one of these things, you don't put your emergency fund into a property because it's not liquid, and you don't plan to eat that for the next 3 years because it just isn't going to work. There are too many things that go wrong. Can you say beer virus? You know, all the distributions are off right now, so you're not seeing it. But then on the other hand, if you're in the stock market, you've seen a big dump down, you know, so the stock market will come back, as will the property. But, you know, right now I'm living on the cash that I had in another account, and that's just the way it is. I don't even have Social Security at this point. I'm just, I'm unemployed completely. But let's see. So back to this. Do you, okay, when I look at the thing, I am really all about total return. I am at growing the total wealth. I am not a for speed person. I don't expect it to grow fast. The first deal took 4 years. I came in at a wonderful time. My average over the 10 years that I've been in, the first 8, 9, 10 years was 30% annualized return. 30% annualized is not a bad deal. I don't know. The stock market was doing, I think they say, if you're a Dave Ramsey person, you can do 12. I've yet to find those particular funds, but he says you can do 12. 8 is probably more likely on an average index when you come over the time. I tend to pick mutual funds when I'm doing it and can beat the average, but not like he says he can. But we'll leave that alone. Anyway, 30% still beats the heck out of me. My dude in Weatherford, he can beat me too. He usually runs 3 or 4% ahead of me. So I'm like, I'm okay and he's better. Anyway, the point being is that I don't look at the money for today. I look at it for the future. And, you know, questionable how much future I personally have, but we won't go there. Don't want to think about that. But when we started this, you know, we had some money that we'd saved up. You know, I'm a bit of a squirrel. I probably have the first dollar sitting in a drawer somewhere around here somewhere. And, you know, we had money to invest, and I didn't have to be a lead to make some money. I had money to invest, which is pretty much the requirement if you're trying to be a passive. Let's see, what's the other part? Do you focus on returns? I do look at the returns, but again, it is the lead that is, you know, I want a lead who is honest, forthright, has scruples, if you will. He doesn't necessarily have to have the best deal out there, but it's reasonable. I mean, I don't want to get jerked around too much. I tend to avoid acquisition fees. I don't like them. I don't see where that helps both of us. I tend to avoid waterfalls. Luckily, in Brad's group, we get a pretty good return. There's typically very few waterfalls, and there's typically very few acquisition fees. so I can avoid that. Yes, I do focus on the business plan. Let's see, what's an example? David Inco, who I think most people know, he's got a property in Fort Worth. I did invest in the thing, but they had this, it's a townhome community, 50 units, and they're all townhomes. They're very nice property. But he was saying that, well, we got two choices on how to get out. We can sell the whole thing as a single entity, or we can sell them off one by one. And I'm thinking that's the dumbest thing I'd ever seen. So plan B ain't going to work. Plan A, he had a reasonable plan A, so I still got into it. Let's see, what are the things you focus on the analysis? Oh, okay, so I'm looking on the analysis. You generically are telling me you're going to raise the rents 5, 10, 15% in year one, and then 1 or 2% the years after. Oh, really? And how in the devil are you going to do that when I look at your unit size and I look at your comps, and I see that you're pretty much close to the top, and you're telling me you're going to raise your rents? I don't believe it. Or you're going to cut your expenses more than I believe you can cut your expenses. What is it you're going to do? And if you're going to try and raise that income, what sneaky little thing are you planning on doing? Oh, you're going to put in covered parking. Well, does that make sense in the environment you're in? I got a property in Florida. We talked about it. Those guys don't care about their cars. They let them get rained on. They let them get sunned on. They don't care. You couldn't sell a covered parking space if you had to. So, does your community accept that? And some do, some don't. So anyway, does the business plan make sense? There's some people that bought a property. I had 2 properties in New Mexico, didn't do worth a darn, made a skosh of money. Had 1 property in Oklahoma, actually lost some money. Up until that point, I could always say, haven't lost a penny. Now I cannot say that. I have lost a bit more than a penny, but at least I got most of my money back, which brings up another horror story. If you'll remind me, I'll tell you that one. In any case, so in New Mexico, we tried like anything, but one of the things that sort of stood out to me is they had coolers. And I'm like, who in the devil? I should have recognized it ahead of time. I didn't. But who in the devil wants to live in a place where you can't go over and say, I want to be cooler? Because coolers work most of the time, but they don't always work. So anyway, somebody had a property. They had coolers on it, and I wasn't going to invest because I just don't like coolers. And I like the lead quite a bit, too. Really, I was saddened by that. Let's see, the one in Oklahoma, they just don't have the business to support, the business model to support it. I don't know, it's an income thing. Always check the income in the area, make sure they can afford the rent that you want to charge them. Make sure that the ingress, egress to the property is reasonable. The one in Oklahoma had terrible ingress, egress. They had changed the road system there, and we royally got screwed on the deal because you couldn't get to and from the apartment easily. We didn't have traffic. Therefore, no traffic, no renters. That one was 100 units. We got it to about 70% occupancy, I think, when we probably bought it slightly higher than that, but it fell to 70 at some point. And so it took us a year to build it up to 90, I guess it went from 72 to 92. We got up 20%. Something happened with the water. The management company didn't recognize that. We were billing back for water. Every resident got, a huge water bill. 20 people move out. Boom, 92 to 72. No time flat, 1 month. And it was going to take us another year to get up. We ended up just selling it to cut our losses and go on. So, look at the ingress and egress. There was a second property. I wasn't dumb enough to get to this one over in Garland, where it was like behind a church. Somehow churches are supposed to be good, but you couldn't get to the place. You had, this really strange access. So it again, didn't want to get into that one.
So
okay.
Yes, that's great info. So one of the questions that Omar is asking here is that I think a lot of people have that question is, what are some of the main mistakes that a passive investor would do today when comparing and analyzing deals? Because when you look at a pro forma, every deal is great, right? So what are some of the main mistakes you think a passive investor can do today?
I guess I'm going to go back to the lead on the thing. If the lead is honest. For many years, I worked in sales support, and I apologize if any of you guys are wonderful salesmen, but by and large, when a salesman's speaking, his lips are moving, and you know what that means. So there's just some people that I am not comfortable being in a deal with. And sometimes those people are, shall we say, making those pro formas look a little bit more flashy than they should. And so, you know, my job when I'm trying to invest is to try and discern whether or not I believe. And I've probably missed some good deals, and I've probably missed some bad deals. And sadly, I have gotten into deals that have not performed terribly well on occasion. I've got 5 out of the 34 I'm holding, 5 of them are shaky. And I do have a little bit of a concern with this the beer virus, but I think they'll make it, and we'll move on from there. But they will not be home runs by any stretch of the imagination. So let's see, how did you put that past in? What can you do? Sometimes they tell you things that are just not believable. So I would say that, like in many things that are not believable, don't believe them. You know, some things just sound way too good to be true. And you know, check to see if their analysis, you know, are there units in the area? You can go to Zillow or several other different places and find out what the comps are yourself. I mean, you don't have to even visit the place. You know, at the beginning of this, there was a list of states I've been to. I've actually been to all the properties that are out of state at this point. Is that a true statement? Yes. But I've actually not been to a couple of them here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, which is really sad, but I haven't. But you can always go there and do, you know, sort of a little mini comp around the place. I don't have access to or easy access to the stuff. What's the big database thing that everybody can go to? But anyway, I don't have easy access to that, but I can go out to Zillow and check it out and see what's going on around there. And then if I have a comfort with the lead, I'm going to tend to believe what he says, but I'm going to check a little bit. So it's not that I don't go into a huge amount of analysis. I know a couple people that do, and they've been in the same deals I've been in, and it hasn't done them that much different of good. I guess I just guess better, or maybe I'm lucky. I don't know which it would be. Did you trust but I like that, trust but verify. Yes, you're right, Charlie. Let's see. What is the main mistakes? The main mistakes. I think in today's thing, and I'll go back to that acquisition fee. Some people have jumped into deals, and you know, in the outside world, outside of Brad's world, yeah, I think most of them are going to have an acquisition fee. But if you've got access to the Brad deals that do not have an acquisition fee, at least that dude's not pocketing your money. I mean, that's like buying a loaded fund, and I don't like them either. So I try to avoid those like the plague. Now, is that the only piece? No, but it certainly sets you up for a little bit higher failure rate, I think, when you try to give the lead way a lot of money up front. And, you know, there have been deals where, oh, we're putting this much in the deal and we're taking an acquisition fee. And when you look at the math, they haven't got any money in the deal. Mm-hmm. You got, there's one deal that was, oh, we're taking the acquisition fee and we're rolling it into the deal and that'll be our input. Yeah. You know, and I was like, well, that's not all that good either. I mean, it's the same math, only versed differently. So, and if you watch a lot of the presentations, after a while, you start seeing the bovine scatology factor. Y'all can look it up later. The idea being is that if the guy's got an assumption, assumptions are the best thing in the world. If he's got a new loan is the best thing in the world. And if he's got whatever facet of this thing that he's got, it's the best thing. He's just polishing, if you will. Yep. And you get used to this and you go, wait a minute, dude, don't try and, blow sunshine where it doesn't belong. It isn't good. And so I laugh my way through a lot of the presentations. I still sometimes get into them. But, I watch out for some of the oversells. Let's see, did you say a new passive? No, you just said passive. I will say that there's two pieces of this puzzle that I really find terribly offensive to the passives. They oversell the IRA concept. Oh, you can do it in your IRA. That is just complete. Well, no, it is not complete. You can do it. It's just you are not going to make the returns if you're honest with the IRS, because they will come after you for that UBIT, UDFI. It is just not, in my opinion, the way to go. And it makes no sense to me to turn a capital gain into income when you get old. I'm old, and I realize this, and I'm like, why would you want to do that? It just doesn't. It isn't real sensible to take, a good benefit and turn it into a no good benefit. You lose your depreciation and you lose your cap gain rate. Now, maybe a Roth, but definitely not a traditional.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get into, the cost segregation. I am not flat sure, but to this point, I do not think that the cost segregation does the passive investor anywhere near the kind of good that they seem to imply it does, with the caveat that you should talk to your tax representative. Essentially, if you will listen to those things, every conversation that has to do with that cost segregation ends in talk to your tax thing because we're not tax consultants. No, you're not. But you've done it so many times, you ought to have realized that it doesn't do the passive that much good. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if I buy property number one, that cost seg doesn't do me squat unless I sold my Amazon at a huge profit and I take it against that. Not a problem. Could happen. That shouldn't happen, I don't think, because Amazon's not that bad. But if, on the other hand, you're buying a property after you've just sold one, then I call it the mini 1031. And what happens is all the gain on the first one can be sucked into with the depreciation, and essentially you've got no gain because the depreciation overweighs the gain, and poof, you push it out another few years. And taxes paid later are always better than taxes paid now. So I like that one, and it is true that I get some benefit, but I don't get a benefit the first time, and I think they sucker a lot of people into that. Oh, big benefit, and unless you're a tax professional, it isn't going to happen.
So Charles, based on the current state of the coronavirus and all of that, how is that changing your investing strategy? Are you waiting on the sidelines a little bit to see how it goes, or what's your thought?
Not because of the coronavirus. I invest. We did 50. So the first 13 deals were my wife and I alone. Well, first 12 deals were my wife and I alone, and I put one in an IRA, which is why I think I speak from some experience. In any case, on the 14th deal through the 50th deal, we created an LLC, and my children are part owners of that LLC. So I manage it for all of us at this point. And as we're holding 34 deals, I feel, and we had our board meeting, and everybody felt that it was, a little bit onerous to maintain a watchful eye on the 34 deals. I am a very active passive investor. I watch a lot of stuff. I try to keep my eye to what's going on, and I send a lot of emails to leads, many of which may hate me, but that's beside the point. In any case, because of the 34, I am on the sidelines. We had our meeting last Christmas. So I was on the sidelines then. We sold one deal since then, and we were planning to sell another deal. It is, of course, on hiatus at this point, and I don't know what will really happen. But I need to really bleed down probably 3 or 4 more deals. So I'm on the sideline, but not because of the beer virus. There might actually be, as we come out of this thing, some really good choices. And I may have to, grit my teeth and do it again. But at this point, I'm in a hold mode because of the beer virus, and I'm in a bleed down mode simply because I've got so many of them. The point, what many of the passives may or may not realize is that cash call feature, and many people do not have the deep pockets that they possibly will need for this. So there may be some pain and agony if it lasts more than 2 or 3 months. I am hoping that we've done our April, and most people are collecting most of their money. We will have some issues in May, and that depends on how much Trump money gets out there. I'm a fan. Don't take that as a negative comment. But essentially, if those people have money to pay their rent in May, if we end this thing in May and start turning it back on, then we'll probably be okay. There'll be some problems in June, but they'll be pulling back out. If, on the other hand, this thing lasts longer than that, then there may be cash calls. And I'm trying to hold a fair amount of war chest cash for that purpose also. So I'd be looking to, if we get to June and it's turning around and a deal comes up, I'll probably get into it. If we get to mid-May and a deal comes up, I probably will not, simply because I think holding cash is a good idea right now.
Mm-hmm. So there was a question, Charles, about the structure that you use or would recommend from somebody from a asset protection? And like, do you have different?
Protection.
Yeah, would you use like different LLCs? Would you just invest personally with your name? Does that make a difference from your perspective?
All of the deals I did by myself were in our name. All of the deals I've done since the LLC was created have been in the LLC, but the kids are also part owners, so it's a partnership LLC, not really a protection LLC. A comment was made yesterday or the day, what is this? This is Wednesday. But yesterday, there's an Anderson tax thing, and I was listening to it. One comment was made that if it's done in an LLC, there is some small benefit to being a tax professional. I'm not sure I believe it yet. So there is perhaps, and I say perhaps, something there. But as for there's something in Wyoming, you can go to Wyoming if you don't want anybody to know who you are and get sort of an anonymous LLC. But that was not my purpose. You can, for protection against yourself, somebody does a slip and fall, sues the LLC that owns the property, they're not going to get to you anyway. The most you can lose is what you invested as a limited partner. That's settled. So there's no real issue there. And an LLC, I don't think if somebody slips and falls on my property, that LLC is going to protect anything from that. They could invade that. So I don't see the LLC as being any kind of asset protection. There's a couple of places it could be, it could keep you secret, and maybe that's an asset protection, but that wasn't my purpose. There is perhaps an ability on your taxes that it, property A, B, C, D, and F, when you're buying and selling, they merge and sum together, and then you get a K1 if you have another partner. Say again? Who said that? I heard a voice. Nobody. Okay. Right now the IRS has this thing about disregarded entities. So if I had an LLC and it were only my wife and I, it would be disregarded, and so everything would come straight to us anyway, and so there would not really be any tax advantage that way. But because we are a partnership, it seems to add together, add and subtract better inside the LLC, but I really can't prove it. That's just sort of a feeling I've got at this point.
Yep. And just for people who are maybe brand new, most large multifamily deals that we're talking here, they do create typically two LLCs, one that's purchasing the property and one that's the manager LLC. So you already started as a passive investor to be a member of the LLC. So you already, again, I'm not representing any asset protection here, but I'm just saying that you already started with an LLC. You never invested, you're never buying the asset personally. So I guess we're talking about multiple levels of LLCs.
Right.
And there was a question from Craig here. I think you made a comment about maybe not about using self-directed IRA.
Yeah. If you can get away with making a solo 401k, that will allow you to not be taxed under UBIT, UDFI. So try for that. I did that. I'm not sure I was legal, but by and large, because I was managing our family, LeMaire Family Investing LLC, he said, okay, that's your business, boom, that you did it, poof. And that was enough to qualify me in the guy who wanted my money, his eyes, and so we did it. Now, whether the IRS will come back and bite me, I do not know. And that will be something we will find out in a year or so, or 3, or whatever. But that was my plan, because let me tell you that one. That was a great property. This is actually a Kenny Wolf property. We bought it in, I'm trying to think. I believe we bought that one in 12. Bought it in 12, still own it. At year 2, I had put in $100,000, and he hands me back $76,000, so I got 33 in the deal. He'd also handed me a few thousand per year at that point also, but I keep them in different columns. I think in portfolio terms, at least that's what I call it, there's capital and then there's distributions, and I keep them in different piles. Anyway, he hands me back the 76. I now have 33 in the deal. He's still paying me about $14,000, $15,000 a year, So I'm going, hey, this is like 45% return, cash on cash, or distributions if you want to be technical. In any case, I'm like, this is a cool thing. So we went on for another 5 years, and last October, he writes me a check, or writes my IRA a check, damn it. Anyway, this is the one that did an IRA. It's terrible. He writes me a check for $240,000. And I'm like, yeah, this is pretty cool. So that goes into the IRA, not to me, sadly. But he's also, from that point on, I still have about a value of $200,000 in the deal. And he's still writing me a check. Well, not this quarter, but he has been historically writing me, about $14,000, $15,000 a year. And I'm not even sure how I do the math on this one. I mean, if I've got a negative couple of hundred, I mean, what's the cash on a negative couple of hundred when he pays me 10,000? I mean, it's just the math is mind-boggling. But yes, it has done very, very well.
Infinity returns.
And so, yeah, I've got anyway, I'm not upset about that deal at all, except that it's in an IRA. Now, realize that IRA, all that money could have been characterized as capital gains. But sadly, it will all come to me now that I'm old and I get the RMDs. It'll all come to me as income. And so I'll get to pay income tax rates on it rather than capital gains rates, which is why I'm sort of bent. Now, the other piece of the puzzle on that thing, IRA, I mean, if it had been a Roth, yeah, maybe that would have been a much better choice. But sadly, it wasn't. The other property that Kenny did, and we bought them not that far apart. And this one is much worse. So this is the terrible property. And I say that tongue-in-cheek. I really have some horror stories. This one turned out to not be a horror story, but it was for a while. So this is a property up in Denton. We bought the thing. I put in 125. We're about to close on the deal. Charles, could you get some more money to me? Okay, sure, fine. I put in another 25. So I had 125 in the deal. At the end of year 2, he hands me back 116,000. So I've got 9,000 in the deal, my way of thinking. Okay, sure. There's equity. I'm screwed on equity, but if I'm talking my cash, I got that in the deal. And he'd been paying me up till that point, probably $8,000-9,000 a year at that point. So we refied the place. He hands me the 116, not one more distribution for 5 years. Poof. Well, 4.5. And so we just sold the place, and he writes me a check for $330,000. Worked out to be a 29% internal rate of return. Am I upset? No. Did I really care during that 5-year period? I only had 9,000 in the deal. Who cared? 9,000 is peanuts in this thing. So not a bad deal at all. But that was the high time. If you're thinking about whoever the new guy was, if you're thinking about doing this, those were the wonderful years. The returns were wonderful. Now the returns, with the exception of the beer virus, are going to only be great. And I say that on the beer virus when I went to economic presentations. We have a couple of economists present every year. A really good place to do is through Old Capital, Paul Peoples' organization, where they have these really nice presentations. 3 or 4 years ago, it was, we're going to have a bad year in the next 5 years. 3 years ago, we're going to have a bad year in the next 5 years. Last year, we're going to have a bad year in the next 5 years. Guess what? We got our bad year. It was coming. It's just that goes on hold. It won't change that much. And I'll be, punching my my bearer bonds on my apartment sooner or later again soon. I'm thinking it'll turn around just fine. People still got to live somewhere, and they don't have an app that you can live in.
Yep. Do you have a minimum IRR that you look into your passive deals, Charles? Is that a parameter that you look for?
Well, IRR is an interesting term, and if you can do the math, that's fine. If you can't, I'll be glad to debate it, but probably this is not the right place. Essentially, IRR is, you can use it predictively, and it's complete magic and hokum, because you can modify those numbers and you have no idea what your real cash flows are going to be. You have no idea what your real reversion cap rate, that's the sell cap rate for those who are new. And I mean, there's just so many variables that it's all hokey. I do a post-mortem IRR on every deal we sell, just so I can look at what has happened. And, the best one was the Staples. We held it for 19 months. I more than doubled my money, and it ended up being 79%. I mean, you really can't get too upset about an annualized return of 79%. The second best one was a thing down in South Dallas. Ended up being 58%. I've had two 45%, several 29%. Oh, a couple of three in the 35, 37% area. So, I mean, they have just been wonderful. But in those days, they were telling me they were going to get 18, 19% internal rate of return. And on a few of them, I got a lot less than that. But on a lot of them, I got a lot more than that. So essentially, my average turned out to be 30, and they were sort of predicting 19. So today, they're predicting 14, 15, maybe 16 on some of the outliers. I don't mean to say liars. Yes, I do. But, you know, if they're telling me today that they might be able to get 15%, for instance, there's going to be a few of them that hit 20, 25%. Am I upset with that? No. You know, that still beats the heck out of my stock market. Or it's a good second foot. If it even, you know, equals the stock market, it's a great second foot. This year sucks. Last year, let's see, get me right, 19. I mean, I think I ended up getting dang near 30% on the stock market. And, you know, the properties didn't do as well as that. But the year before, stock markets were flat and the properties were doing just fine. So, you know, it's just nice to have them play against each other and have, whoever said that earlier, it's nice to have that foot in both places, so to speak. Let it level out. Diversification, as it were. I will, as an advertisement for Brad, he goes more for the Dale Carnegie method. And Dale Carnegie, and I think I have the right guy, it was put all your eggs in one basket and protect your basket. And that's good. I think if you're a lead, you need to have a focus on the property that you're in and the space, you know, whether it's hundreds, 200 units, whether it's A's, it's B's, but you need to be focused on what you're playing in. As a passive, I don't care. You know, you're going to make me money. So I have some that do this and some that do that. I got some townhouses. I've got just plain old apartments. I got B's. I got C's. I even got an A somewhere. I've gotten into 2 or 3 value plays, and I'm scared to death, but I'm really not. And I've gotten into a lot of yield plays. So it's just, you know, sort of random focus because it's diversification to me. To the lead, he ought to know what he's doing and he ought to be good at it. To me, it's put money in and get money back. Andrew Carnegie. Well, I had a Carnegie part. Thank you very much.
All right.
I was half right.
Thanks, Charles. Does anybody have any additional questions before we start wrapping up? I know we got a lot of wisdom from Charles today, but I want to make sure that we're answering any additional questions. So Omar has a question about tools that you may recommend or use yourself, like podcasts, books.
Okay. Again, back to my history, there weren't a lot of books, and if there were podcasts back then, I didn't know about it. I'll go that route. My kids had a what was it, an MP3, so presumably there were podcasts, but I never did it. I actually, you know, went down to Brad's place. It was Lifestyles at the time, and then Brad started his own. And I listened very intensely, and I asked a bunch of questions, and I got a good understanding of what it is. You know, it's my attitude that this is not rocket surgery. It is not terribly hard to figure out what's going on. But if you ask a lot of questions and you pay attention, you can get pretty good at it. And so that was sort of the way I learned. And then since then, you know, I started playing on bigger pockets. I enjoy getting out there. Usually I will say good things about Brad. Often I will think bad things, and I try not to flame people too badly, but people ask really some questions that say they're not in their right place yet, so to speak. Like, you know, multifamily, is that 2 properties? Is a duplex multifamily? That just drives me nuts. But I mean, they ask a lot of questions that are just ridiculous. You know, like, can I get my friends and we just all buy a place? You know, have no concept of what syndication is, no concept that it's a violation of SEC rules. One more thing about leads: do not work with people who do not follow the rules. If those dogs come out and say, you know, hey everybody, I got this deal, come talk to me about it, don't do business with them because they are not honest. There is something going to go wrong. Maybe not on this deal, but somewhere along the line, they're going to get their comeuppance. Don't mess with those people. My take on that, and I'm sorry for the aside, if you've got a lead who lets clowns into the deal, He let you in, but he lets a clown in. And we're going to assume you're not the clown. But that clown calls up about, a month after you buy it and says, hey, I lost my job. I need my money back. Or the returns aren't what he thought. He hires a lawyer to go after you. Well, the deal is going to end up having to defend it. There's insurance, in theory, in some cases, to do that. But by and large, if he causes enough ruckus, or if he sells his stuff outright, you could cause this thing to no longer be a private entity and be a public entity and force the deal to have to do public filings. And public filings are expensive. You got one apartment building paying for that, nobody will get any money ever out of that deal. So don't deal with a guy who lets clowns into the deal, or might let a clown into the deal. If he doesn't treat you like a possible clown and prove you're not, then you don't want to deal with him, because he might let a clown in who is a clown. All right, that was aside. I was going somewhere. Oh yeah, let's see, experience. So what other tools do I use? So I just, I mess with Brad. I have read that best ever book, and I think very highly of it. I only found 2 mistakes in the book, like he had a math equation wrong. I thought it was hilarious. He gave me a free chapter because I pointed it out. Whoop-de-doo. Anyway, that was a great book. There's a couple other books in there. So, when I get in there, Paul Moore wrote a good book, The Perfect Investment, that I think is a great beginner book. It sort of explains why you want to do it and sort of the overview of it. And then, the Fairless book really takes you to the nuts and bolts of being a lead. But if you're a knowledgeable passive, being qualified to be a lead is a good thing, because you can tell what they're up to. I know that there's, of the 100 people who get into a deal, probably 90 of them don't pay a lick of attention, and they do nothing more than go to the mailbox and get their checks or look at their ACHs as they come in. But I do tend to look at a lot more stuff, and things drive me nuts on these deals. I send emails about stuff all the time, but you got no real choice. If you're a silent partner, limited partner, they don't have to listen to you, and some of them tell me to take a hike, and that's all I can do.
And Charles, there was a question about if you, over your 50 deals, have you only invested on SumRock deals, or have you invested outside of the group?
I have one deal that is a triple net, and it is therefore not multifamily, and it was not a SumRock person. It was a person I met at one of the old Capital deals, and we talked about it, and they convinced me after a lot of discussion about, the differences between them and things like that. And so I went off and learned a little bit about that, and it has worked out to be very good. By and large, every other deal has been somebody that has been involved with Brad either before he was SumRock or has been post-SumRock, if you will. They've left the group, and I still work with them occasionally, but they've all been SumRock trained, which is something I very much like. I like the concept that everybody who puts out a deal to me uses essentially the same spreadsheet. I also happen to like it when they leave the spreadsheet alone. Now, it can be a PDF. I don't mind that. But when they start hacking it up and moving it into different places, I get a little hesitant, because I don't know what they're trying to pull. But I like looking at the real spreadsheet, because I know where to look. I know what I'm looking for. I got 2 stories, and I apologize if I go over time. You don't mind if I keep talking. If you just leave if you don't like me. In any case, there's one guy. His name was Elias, and we met on the Fair Meadows deal, the one down in South Dallas. And so he came up to me, and he was at one time a Bradite, but he had apparently left the Brad group. Charles, I got this deal. I got this really great deal. Guy, and it was never clear exactly who the person was he was speaking with, but, he showed me this deal. It's got really great numbers, but I don't have any money to get into the thing. I said, well, ship it over to me. You won't steal it with you. No, I'm not stealing it. You know me. I never do a lead thing. So he ships it to me. There were 12 catastrophic errors on that spreadsheet. It essentially was not a Brad spreadsheet, but it was very similar to it, and I could go through it, and I went through it, and I went like, this thing's dumb as a post. One of the ones that it was so easy for me to remember, the way they made some of the returns look really, really good, is they only used a 99-year lease or a 99-year mortgage or term period on the thing, so that the principal was near zero, and that made it look a lot better. You can't get a 99-year, by the way. I mean, it just doesn't exist. But by and large, that guy who was trying to sell this thing to him, he said that was great. And so if you get a thing from either a broker or an owner or from anybody you don't know, or even one you do know, look it over, because, they can play games with that thing. I actually told Elias that you need to go back to school. If he was able to snooker you on that one, it was bad. Let's see, the second story I will tell you is you do need to be careful. And some deals are just not there to be gotten into. I have a friend, he was in the Brad group, and he decided to do a deal with a fellow who had left the Brad group, and we won't go into names at this point, but he'd gotten into a deal in Atlanta. And it was a really flaky kind of deal where they were buying it. He's partnering up with this guy, and I didn't know that guy from Adam, so I wanted nothing to do with it because it sounded flaky. Well, my friend shared me numbers. He put in 75, and he got back his 17 at the end of that thing after about 3.5 years, 3 years maybe. So not a good deal. My worst so far is I got a 15% decrease rather than I can't do the math that fast. He lost well over 50% of his money. So, just be careful with whom you work. It is very important. Know that they have, I am willing to take a person with a mentor and use it as referential experience. So I've dealt with, I believe it's 22 or 4 persons. It was their first deal inside the Brad group. And most of them have done wonderfully. None of them have done terribly, because I think they work harder and they don't take as high a cut right off the top. So I like getting them up front. They're pretty good. So I'm not opposed to dealing with a person, but they have to pass some other tests. It's not, oh, you're new, let me work with you. But no, if they have a lot of other characteristics, being in on their first deal is not something that's really negative to me. I see a lot of people, oh, if they don't have 30 years, don't do it. That's always the guy who's got 30 years is espousing how many years you got to have. If you only had 25, he'd be telling you you need 25 years, if you know what I mean. Polish, exactly. A little bit of polish on that thing. So I'm not against working with a new guy if I know that he's got some marbles up there and he the glint in his eye and he's excited, kind of thing. Anyway, I've run out. Let's see.
He's a real estate attorney, right?
Say what? I'm sorry, I missed that. Something about a real estate attorney? What? Huh? Okay, never mind.
No worries.
Have you ever invested in? No. Okay. I think we got them all. Nobody else got a good question?
All right. So.
Well, I hope I didn't embarrass myself.
No, you did great. So I just want to, before we wrap up, I just want to, for the folks who are new here, just to remind everybody, we meet on the first and third Wednesday of every month. So our next meeting is going to be on May 6th. And for that one, we focus on how to get started as a syndicator. And then we'll meet again on the third Wednesday as with another edition for focusing on passive investors. So hopefully you guys can continue joining us. And again, this is Charles' information and Charles' email. Charles, you did an awesome job. I mean, you are the most experienced so far we've had on our program here as a passive investor with a wealth of knowledge. So I really appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I rather enjoy doing this. It is nice to try and give back.
No, so, really.
Thank you very much, Charles.
Pretty much my attitude.
We really appreciate, and
I just to hear those stories and those experiences and the good and the bad experiences. I think that's where everyone learns the most. So we thank you very much, and we hope to have you back again to tell us more stories.
About our next 50 deals.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching this week's episode of the Multifamily 0 to 1. Join us live the first and third Wednesday of every month.